This narration emphasizes that when Allah commands and prohibits a human being, the attention of Allah is towards the aql. And it is on the basis of the intellect that Allah rewards a person or punishes a person. The narration, it says that لَمَّا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ الْعَقْلِ إِسْتَنْتَقَهُ, that when Allah created the intellect, He gave it the faculty of language. ثُمَّ قَالَ لَهُ أَقْبِلْ فَأَقْبَلْ ثُمَّ قَالَ لَهُ أَدْبِرْ فَأَدْبَرْ. Allah told the intellect to step forward, it went forward. And Allah told the intellect to go backwards, it went backwards. After that it says, ثُمَّ قَالَ وَإِزَّتِي وَجَلَالِي مَا خَلَقْتُ خَلْقًا هُوَ أَحَبُّ إِلَيَّ مِنْكَ وَلَا أَكْمَلْتُكَ إِلَّا فِي مَنْ أُحِبُّ. That Allah says that by my glory, by my honor, I have not created a creation which is more beloved than you, O Aql. And I only perfect you in those whom I love. And then after that it says, Ama, that be aware that only by you, Iyaka, that only by you I command, and only by you I prohibit, and only by you I reward, and only by you I punish. This goes to show that the barometer of reward and punishment is the aql and the intellect of a human being. No, another tradition from Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. The Imam in another tradition demonstrates that if a person wants to be devoted to the religion, then that individual has to use their intellect. The Imam says, Man kana aqilan kana lahu deen. That individual who uses his intellect, that individual is devoted to the religion. وَمَنْ كَانَ لَهُ دِينٌ دَخَلَ الْجَنَّةِ. And the one who is devoted to the religion, that individual will enter paradise. You see, what all of these narrations, they demonstrate is that the intellect has an immense status, an immense position within the life of a human being. But at the same time, despite having all of these narrations, each of us realize that there are limits to the intellect as well. If I told you that rationally, without looking at the Quran, without looking at the Hadith, tell me what will happen after death, can you rationally do that? Can you rationally say there will be two angels who question us? After that, we'll be in the grave for a period of time. Then God will raise us. There will be a sirat, there will be a mizan, there will be all of these stages. No, rationally, we can't come to that conclusion. That demonstrates that there are limits to the understanding our intellect can reach. But now, I'll give you another example. Is there any Muslim who will say that this verse of the Quran, I disagree with it? We can say that I do not understand this ayat of the Quran. But no Muslim will say that my intellect is higher than the Quran. What this goes to show is that even though the aql and the intellect has a role, there are certain limitations. You know, when you look at Islamic history, one of the most heated debates in Islamic history has been about the role of the intellect in the deen. For example, one of the theological debates occurred between the Ash'aris and the Mu'tazila. The Ash'aris were a school of thought that they took everything literally, in the sense that there is no role for reason in the deen. If Allah throws a pious person in the fire of hell, then it's the domain of Allah, we cannot rationalize it. But then there was others who said no, through intellect it reigns supreme, but Ahl-e-Bait, they gave a neutral perspective. You find this was one debate. Another debate we see is even within the Shia school of thought. You know, there was a discussion, there was different opinions about what role does intellect play even within Shi'ism. When you look at Shaykh al-Saduq was understood to be more of a traditionalist. But when you compare him to Shaykh al-Mufid gave a larger role to the intellect in understanding the deen. But no, I'll give you another example. You know, in the modern world, in the past few hundred years, two of the most important events in the modern world was the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution. Both of these events, they changed the scope of the world in terms of who the powers that be were, and and in terms of what type of knowledge it reigns supreme. When this occurred, there were different reactions in the Muslim world. One reaction said that scientific progress is something which is not a part of the faith. They would listen that there were many atheists who would argue that your God is a God of the gaps. Then what does this mean? They would say in the olden days, when there was no science, there were a lot of things we didn't know. When we didn't know something, we would place God into that gap and we understand it. But today, that gap is filled by science. Thus, we don't need that existence of God and that attachment to God. You see, when one group of Muslims, they saw this type of rhetoric going on, they went back to the roots that intellect plays no role in the deen. It's very famous in the Ottoman Empire in 1515. The Shaykh al-Islam of the Ottoman Empire passed a fatwa deeming the printing press haram. That one cannot use the printing press, and you find that the Sultan of that time, he passed the ruling that anyone who uses it will be beheaded. What this goes to show is that this attitude was one that the intellect does not have a role in the life of an individual. But at the second level, you find there was another group. This second group, everything within the deen, they wanted to justify it from modern science. If there is a hadith of Rasulullah, they would say, what does modern science say about it? Even to the extent that there was a school of tafasir where they would try to interpret the Quran in light of modern science. There was a famous individual in Egypt by the name of Dr. Taha Hussein. And Dr. Taha Hussein was one of these liberal reformist thinkers. And when he came to interpreting the Quran, and he saw the ayat of the Quran in Surah Al-Fil, which says, تَرْمِيهِمْ بِهِجَارَةٍ مِّن سِجِّيلٍ, that when the army of Abraha came to the Kaaba, and they wanted to destroy the Kaaba, Allah, He sent a miracle in the form of a group of birds carrying stones, and they were pelted with stones, and that army was destroyed. You know what Taha Hussein said? He said that this is an analogy for smallpox. That birds, they carry smallpox. They went over there, and this Quran is just speaking metaphorically. So you see, even in the modern world, there was one current that tried to over-rationalize the deen. There was another current that removed intellect from the deen. Regardless of what form of these debates they may take in, the crux of these debates is the question that what is the application and what is the limit of the intellect in understanding the religion. And that's why tonight, when we examine this topic, we'll examine it in the following stages. Number one, we'll examine what role does aql play in establishing our belief and aqaid. And what narration of the Imam demonstrates that the intellect is more than just a mental capacity. At the second level, we'll examine, does the Quran use rational arguments? And in what ways did the Prophet Ibrahim use rationality to solidify the belief in the oneness of God? From the third level, we'll examine in what ways did the Ahl-e-Bait use rational arguments when it came to belief. From the fourth level, we'll examine, does rationality have a role in Islamic law? From the fifth level, we'll examine that how can we use rationality to establish a society? From the sixth level, we'll examine, did Imam al-Hussein use intellectual and rational arguments on the day of Ashura? And from the seventh level, we'll examine that the greatest quality of the ashab of Sayyid al-Shuhada was not intellect, but it was taslim and submission. And based on these levels, we'll come to a conclusion in this discussion after a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah.